Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. I know I'm holding us up from getting to lunch, so hopefully we can get through this quickly without too many stomachs rumbling. But it's a really exciting time to be here for us in particular, as I think many of you know that we're potentially on the cusp of commercializing our first of potentially 4 products. I'm going to be making some forward-looking statements, so please refer to the SEC filings for more information about the risks of the company. You know that we as a company have been anchored in the patient for many years, and these are some of the faces that we're very familiar with and that we focus on as we endeavor to bring these therapies to market. The one on the left I just want to comment on for a second. This is a young boy named Ethan. You see him with a skateboard. And one of the examples of how important the patient faces are to us and the memories of these patients are, somebody at the company recently made a table that goes in the lobby of the company. And incorporated into that table are all of his skateboards, as well as a poem that he wrote before he died. This is a young boy who had CALD. We know his family well, who unfortunately didn't survive. And he's a constant memory of us trying to do better. And so every day we walk into the company and we see that skateboard, those skateboards in that table, and it's a constant reminder of how important every face is to us and every person who has these diseases to us. So that's very real and an example of that. We came out with a pretty bold vision for the company, and it just keeps getting bolder. You can see the reference to transfusion-dependent thalassemia, the potential filing in the EU this year with a US filing next year, as well as potential filing for 2121, our multiple myeloma program next year. Following that would be a Lenti-D filing for CALD, and then the reference I just made to that young boy, and then sickle cell in 2022. So a huge endeavor for a company that is 800 people right now, going to hopefully 1,100 by end of year. But we also have an engine behind that we think is going to deliver for the long term, beyond just the 4 core programs that we're executing against right now. That builds over time. One of the important points to take away from this is that it is a progressive launch. It's not about the number of patients in 19 and 20. It's about getting the model right for the patients that will accrue, hopefully, over years. And as we hopefully add on CLD patients, sickle cell patients, other genotypes for thalassemia, and ultimately multiple myeloma. So we're focused on 19 and 20 right now, getting the model right in Europe first and then the US for the benefit of all the patients that will enter the system initially, but really importantly for the patients as well that will follow over the years. This is our pipeline. I think you know it reasonably well. I just described it, really anchored in severe genetic diseases and oncology. And the tools you see to the right side of this slide are really the basis upon which we're building our next generation programs in oncology and in severe genetic diseases. We've done a ton of deals trying to bring the best of breed together for the future. You can see some of the both academic institutions we're working with, as well as some of the industrial companies and some of the technologies that we brought in-house or have developed or acquired. And this is an example of how we think the oncology pipeline in particular is going to build over time. It's kind of a one-to-many strategy, as we did with 2121, for example, where we had 2121-7, a next-generation program, entering the clinic as we're getting data from 2121, believing that we need to continue to iterate and improve. And you see examples of this throughout the pipeline, whether it be an internal target, a target with Regeneron, a target with Metagene, another one with the Fred Hutch that should enter the clinic this year, and then lastly, one with UNC that we expect to enter the clinic this year. But there are 2 generations of products being developed simultaneously. This is the iterative nature of our innovation engine that we think will bear fruit as it has with the one prior, and the intent is for that to generate 1 to 2 INDs starting in 2020 and beyond. And these are our potential catalysts for this year across data, a potential US filing as I described, and then an analyst day on May 9th, where we'll get into more detail about our commercial infrastructure and the pipeline. So it's really kind of an R&C investor day, as we've talked a lot about the clinical data. So I'll stop there, and certainly we can dive into wherever you want to go, Dane.
Excellent. So I think what would be interesting point to start with is Bluebird Bio is developing innovative therapies, and in the next 12 months is transitioning from a clinical to commercial stage biotech. with a novel gene therapy for transfusion-dependent beta thalassemia. That's a huge undertaking in several aspects. Within the organization over the next 12 months, what are the key milestones that your team is focused on executing? What are the critical aspects of execution as you build this out for the first time?
Yeah, it is a lot, and especially when you're trying to be a pioneer in Europe, where it's not been done yet, really, in such a robust way, where you've got multiple countries coming online over arguably a couple-year period of time. So there's some basic blocking and tackling that you have to put in place. Obviously, the supply chain in Europe. You've got to get all of the inspections and certificates done and behind you in order to be able to bring commercial product into country and then distribute. We have a manufacturing facility for drug product in Germany, first market, but that's the distribution point for the rest of Europe as well. We have to build a team, so we now have probably close to 70 people. I know it's above 60 people in Europe. Both in Zug, Switzerland, in the kind of corporate European headquarters, as well as now in countries. Now, those people have been in country for a while, in particular the pricing reimbursement folks, the access folks, as well as the medical affairs, trying to build education about gene therapy in general. And now we've got general managers. So building that team out, continue to build that team out, even though we've got the basics of fundamentals already built out, but continue to contribute to that is obviously a big lift and execution for the company. And then you turn to the market dynamics. There are a bunch of things that have to happen. One is getting these qualified treatment centers up and running. So our plan is to have 3 in Germany that are ultimately qualified to deliver the therapy to the patients, 4 in Italy, 2 in the UK, and then France to come on later. That's the initial footprint for these qualified treatment centers, but you have to get the contracts in place with those qualified treatment centers, and then ultimately you have to seek reimbursement on a country-by-country basis. And so you can imagine that we are all in on that, having dialogue with payers right now, not about price, but about the model that we put forth back in January. And those conversations, albeit early, are going quite well. There's engagement, interest, a realization that this is where the field is going, and hopefully, again, we'll be a pioneer there. But that's going to be hard, and it's going to take time and effort. And once we obviously announce the price, then you get into the real negotiations and determine how soon we can access those markets. So it is a lot. It's a tremendous amount going on in the company. And we're trying to learn from some of the things of the launches in the U.S., from some of the other programs. We'll make our mistakes for sure, but hopefully we're bringing the weight of the company, because it's all we do, to bear on this and trying to get it close to right initially and then iteratively learn and evolve as you would expect.
And that I think that's an interesting point on the iterative learning. So you're in a situation where you actually are going to have a fast follow in a number of other indications, CALD, potentially multiple myeloma. How fungible, how do you plan ahead? How fungible are some of the efforts you're undertaking now that then can be applied to different disease areas, but with similarly complex conversations that need to be had with regulators and payers?
Yeah, so there are some things that are foundation to all of those, and there are some things that are clearly different. So the pay-for-performance model and the relationships we build with payers in Europe and eventually in the U.S. are foundational to the way we would engage payers. There might be slight differences, certainly in terms of the outcomes, but that's a foundational principle that we've laid out that we plan to pursue across all of the programs. The manufacturing infrastructure, you're going to leverage predominantly across all of the, and the supply chain itself across all of the programs. So there's a lot of synergies there in terms of how we would deploy CALD. And it's also not just CALD and sickle cell, assuming the data continue to look promising. It's also other genotypes of thalassemia. It's layering on, hopefully, the beta 0, hopefully layering on PEDS after that. So it's a really progressive build, and using some of the foundations that we're building to get better and better at it. There are some things that are different. The qualified treatment centers for CALD may be different than the qualified treatment centers for thalassemia. There's some overlap with sickle cell for sure, but there are also going to be some centers likely for sickle cell that'll be different from thal. So there's a mix there, and obviously that's driven and predominantly by the physicians that treat, in particular, the young boys with CALD, where there are very few experts around the world that treat CALD, so we need to be in those centers where those experts exist. But there are a lot of things that we're going to leverage across the programs, hopefully.
And so from an operational perspective, how do you manage that risk on the supply chain? Your team has undertaken quite a bit of capital expenditure to build out some internal manufacturing facilities. From your perspective, what is that right balance between taking risk internally that your team, will have everything running smoothly going into a commercial launch versus having the redundancy of some of those external partners?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and one I know that's being discussed quite often in the field of cell and gene therapy, and it's a really important one. Ultimately, companies like ours and others make the decision as the data emerge. And we, as you know, made decisions early on to try and grab supply through, ultimately, it was 5 major strategic partnerships that we landed with major CMOs, and that was our first attempt to both have supply access, but also some redundancy throughout that supply chain. We ultimately, as we saw the data over time emerge across all of the programs, made a determination that now was the time to build in-house. We bought the manufacturing facility down in North Carolina. That is going quite well, and I think you'll see more on that in terms of its capabilities and readiness in the not-too-distant future. And then that is a facility that ultimately could be multi-purpose. Right now we're building it out for vector initially, but there absolutely is the ability to potentially build that out for drug product as well. That's going to ultimately depend on the timing of some of these launches and how we see them advance, as well as the pipeline, how the pipeline advances. So we've tried to make really good strategic decisions on capacity, redundancy. But as you know, this is hard. It's something that every company has to pay very close attention to. We're trying to do everything we can to de-risk it, but you never get all the risk out.
And so, as you build out this capability to be for lack of a better word, a broad spectrum player in cell and gene therapy, you've touched on, and your team's touched on, building out a pipeline in oncology over time. The question that comes up a lot in conversations with investors is, you have lead programs in really important rare disease areas. You're building out a pipeline in oncology. Is this a fundamental shift in the pipeline over time to bring oncology forward and that be more of a focus of the company? Or can we expect more additional programs within rare disease areas and something like that you've led with in thalassemia or sickle cell or CALD?
Yeah, there are real opportunities on both sides of our franchises. We call them very simply the oncology franchise and the severe genetic disease franchise, and you're referencing both here. We've talked a bit, and we'll talk more about the pipeline at this RNC Investor Analyst Day coming up on May 9th. So we'll be able to talk a bit more about that. But a lot of the time and attention of our research group is in the oncology space. We think we have a differentiated approach there. It doesn't mean that we don't have activity going on within the severe genetic disease areas. We do. But there, we're laying some tracks right now for what you see up on the screen that we think will be differentiating for us over the long term. All the things I just described that we have to put in place, the relationships that we build, the contracts that we build, the systems that we put in place, the patient-centric orientation of our entire commercial model, we believe is both not only very complex, but incredibly expensive to put in place. So we think there will be opportunities for us, hopefully in the future, to leverage that with some of these smaller indications, whether they're ours or others that might want to partner with us. So they're slightly different strategies. It doesn't mean we're not focused on both sides. It's one, you really have to think deeply about how to affect a solid tumor. And a naked CAR T, in our opinion, is not going to be enough. And so we're bringing all the technologies that we've gained access to bear. And we think we'll have a differentiated approach that has to bear out in the clinic. But we've got an engine now cranking. The severe genetic disease side is just a little bit different in terms of how you build that business.
Well, I think we're running out of time right now, but I would like to thank you for your insights and discussion on Bluebird. Thanks,
Dan.
Jeff.
Thanks, Dan.